I didn't hurt anybody.
Okay.
It's just that it was there, and I just did things that I never got caught. I should have probably been court-martialed for a few things, but at 18, you do crazy things. You're not the brightest person in the world. Oh, go ahead. Whatever.
No, I just get. How did,
Oh,
I just turned on. How did an 18-year-old get to Nuremberg?
Well, I was drafted just after the end of the war. I turned 18 in September 21st. I turned 18 in 1945. I was drafted, and I guess they wanted to ship us out as fast as they can overseas to get the combat men out of there. They wanted peace as fast as they can get it, and they wanted the combat men out because they seen combat and they still had this thought of war going on. They didn't want this. They wanted peace now. So they sent people like me. I didn't go through 16 weeks of training. We went through 8 weeks of training, combat training. It was short. And they shipped us there as fast as we can. And I landed at Le Havre, France, and at some kind of a depot, and I was transferred to Nuremberg, on the outskirts of Nuremberg, a prison of war camp. It was Stalag 13D. I guarded 15,000 to 20,000 SS prisoners. It was for a very short while because they were starting to let the prisoners go at the time. After a year, according to the Geneva Convention, you release the prisoners. And then I was transferred to the Nuremberg trials. That was about the end of May 1946. So I wound up at Nuremberg, guarding the major war criminals at that time.
Yeah, I just think, I'm envisioning at some point, Bill, you walk into the prison for the very first time, and you're kind of walking down the narrow way, and there are prison cells on each side, and all of a sudden you peek in, and you see a defendant for the first time. What's your reaction?
Well, let me tell you, when I first went into that prison, before you go to the prison, you're interviewed by the colonel of the prison itself, Colonel Andrews. And there was about 7 of us, 6 or 7, that were going to be cell guards. So we had to wait in this room till he came in. And well, anyway, he come in the room, and he just told us, he gave us all these rules, and I'm saying, how are you going to follow? Of course, you can't answer him back. He's a colonel. But he was saying that there will be no conversations. You're going to be cell guards. You're going to be at the cells. And he said, there'll be no conversation between the prisoners and the guards. He says, the only conversation you'll have has to be brief. If the prisoner asks you what time it is, you tell him what time it is. But the conversation has to be brief. The prisoner is not allowed to turn his back towards you at any length of time. If he does, you shout at him to turn around. When a prisoner sleep, they sleep. You shine a light into the cell, and they face the light. They can't turn away from the light when they sleep. If they do, you shout at them, turn around. And they can't put their hands underneath the blanket. There's all crazy rules that, you know, the prisoners only eat with a spoon, no knives, no forks. So, you know, there were just rules after rules. And I'm saying, how are you going to follow all of these rules? Well, I'm thinking of this to myself. And, well, the first night I was there, my first prisoner, well, when after receiving these rules from the colonel himself, I went into the prison. My first day into the prison, you know, there was 4 wings to this prison. The first wing held just the major war criminals. The 21 major war criminals were in this area. And as I went in, I looked around, and they had the nameplates over each cell. So as I walked in, I looked, and I seen a nameplate, Herman Goering, cell number 5. So I looked, I said, so this is Herman Goering. I never thought I'd see this man. You know, the only time I seen him is in movies, probably in a newspaper. We didn't have any TVs at the time. So I'm looking, oh, Herman Goering, I got to see this guy. So I went right over to his cell, and in the door there was a window the guards used to look into, and the window was about 15 inches square. It was a square window. So I went over there and I looked in, I seen Goering, who was smoking a pipe and he was reading a book, and he was sitting on his cot. So he's reading this book, so I said it loud enough so Goering, well, I was 18, and when you're 18, you're not the brightest person in the world. I'm sure I wasn't, but I was just a little cocky at the time. So I looked in the window and I seen Goering. I said, so this is Goering. I said, well, he doesn't look like such a big man in prison, and I was really talking loud so he could hear. And Goering turned around and he started staring at me, and I'm rattling off. The guard grabbed my coat and he pulled me back. And he says, Goering can understand English. He says, if he turns you in, you can get court-martialed. I said, well, I better keep my mouth shut, my big mouth shut. So I went over to my first prisoner I had, which was Franz von Papen. Mm-hmm. And von Papen was a very intelligent man. He spoke perfect English. Well, he spoke English, spoke better English than I did. And somewhere around 10 o'clock, there's a curfew where the lights go down, dim. And this is when we attach our light to this window. We have a screen that we attach to the window, and we put a light with a shield around this light that shines in the cell. And we watch them. So I was having trouble, it was my first night, so I was having a little trouble trying to do this. I'm sorry if my hands are in the way.
No, it's not on the country. Want to get them.
I was trying to hook this lamp up with the shield, and there were a couple of, I'm losing my little track of thought here, a couple of wires that you used to just wrap around this screen to hold the light there. So Franz von Papen come over and he told me in perfect English, I can still remember today, I'll never forget that, you know, he told me, he said, would you mind shining the light on the other side of the wall? Otherwise, the glare from the light will keep me awake all night. So I'm looking at him, and I said, it's fine, okay, you know, no harm there. So instead of shining it directly on the cot that he slept, we turned the light over so it would shine on the other side of the wall. So, and he said, do you mind if I give you a hand? I said, no. So he's on the inside, you know, twisting these wires so it would hold like this. So we got it set, and I said, how's that? He said, that's fine, thank you. And he went to bed. I said, gee, what a nice old man. At the time, I didn't know these men that well. Some of them I didn't know. And when he slept, and I'm thinking all these rules, you know, the prisoners are supposed to face the lantern. But I always, you know, all my life I looked at the world as I see it. You know, and I'm saying to myself, how can, you know, I wouldn't be able to sleep facing a light, a bright light like this. So I said, I don't think I could do this, you know, and I had that thought in my mind. If I was there, could I sleep like that? So anyway, he got into bed, and he's facing the light, you know, he's laying on his back. And then about 5 minutes later, 10 minutes, you know, he sort of turns around. So I said, well, you know, he's going to start breaking the rules there. So I said, oh, what the heck, what am I going to do, poke him all night? Yeah. Tell him, turn around, face the. So I says, you know, what condition would they be if I kept poking him all night? He'd have to go to the courtroom the next day, fall asleep in the courtroom. So I let him go, and the first thing you know, he turned completely away. Then one hand went underneath the blanket, so he's breaking the rules again, and the other hand went under. So I said, the heck, I'm not going to wake up this guy. And I let that go, and I broke these rules, and I'm sure other guards did the same thing. Right. And he sort of set a precedence for me, because when I guarded the rest of the prisoners, I did the same thing. Yeah. So there's nothing much. It's just that some of these rules, they very difficult to keep. You know, you just couldn't wake these men up or keep poking them like that. And when we went into the prison, we went at 8 o'clock in the morning. There's probably say roughly 120 of us went inside the prison to guard the inside of the prison. Of course, they had white helmet guards all around the prison itself. They were all over the place. We wore green helmets, the cell guards. We went in 8 o'clock in the morning. We stayed there 24 hours. We were on duty 2 hours on a cell, 4 hours off. 2 on, 4 off for 24 hours. And we were relieved the following morning at 8 o'clock. So we stayed 24 hours in a prison, 24 hours off, 24 hours on, continuous like that. And
did you have cots or places where you could rest? And,
oh yeah. Well, we slept right in the prison itself.
Okay.
So we had our own. When we got in there, it was 3 shifts. So the first shift would sleep on the first level, the second shift on the second level, and a third shift on the third level.
Gotcha.
So when the first shift goes on, they'd wake everybody up on the first floor. They'd go on duty. And then when their turn was up, the second shift would relieve them. So it was pretty well organized. And the most difficult prisoner in there, out of the 21, the most difficult to handle was Rudolf Hess. Even in the courtroom, he gets these little spells, you know, and even in the cells at night, he'd claim he'd have stomach aches, you know, he's being poisoned and he had cramps in his stomach. I believe it was all in his, most of it was in his mind, his own mind, and he used to moan at night, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and he'd wake up the rest of the prisoners, and he was a nuisance. And well, we had little nicknames for some of these men. You know, Herman Goering we'd call Fatty, Fatso, and Rudolf Hess we'd call him a nut. The psychiatrist put it in better terms. The psychiatrist there put it like this. He said, if the road was sanity and the sidewalk insanity, then Rudolf Hess is walking on the curb. And Gilbert, who was the, not the psychiatrist, the psychologist, I knew Gilbert when he was there. I think everybody knew Gilbert. He was all over the place. He put it in these terms. He had a group of us, and he put it like this. He says, in layman's terms, Rudolf Hess has what you call a deteriorating mind. He could be perfectly normal for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and then he goes off. And Hess wasn't all there, you know. He was a nut.
Yeah. You told a story last night that you had an opportunity to go to a church service with the Hermann Goering. Tell me about that.
This is, I was fairly new at the prison, and the first prisoner, of course, Hermann Goering, well, he always gave me dirty looks after this, you know, when I first seen him in the cells and just talking about him, you know, a big man and that. So he gave me a dirty look. So this time I was on his cell, and he's the first man I took to church. I was fairly new at the time, so it was on a Sunday, and they had church services. And not that Goering was a church goer or a very religious man. He was not. It's just that he didn't like to stay cooped up in a prison. You know, you either stay in a prison, look at the 4 walls, or go to church. So naturally, he'd rather go to church than stay in the prison. So when it was time to go, the cells themselves didn't have any locks or keys on these cells. We had a bolt about 3/4 of the way down the door. There was a bolt that you'd slide back to open a door, and you'd slide it into the wall. A huge bolt went right into the wall. It'd lock it, you'd slam it down. And you couldn't reach it from this window. If you put your hand and tried to reach down, it couldn't. It was too low. You couldn't reach that bolt. So this time I was taking Herman Goering to church, so I opened the door, and I wasn't sure where the church was. I knew it was on a second tier. You had to go up these circular metal stairs to get up to the second tier, and I said, gee, I don't know where it is. I said, well, I'll inquire, I'll find out. So I let Goering out, and Goering comes right out. You know, he just gives me a dirty look, and he walked out, and he's leading the way. So I said, oh, great, he's gonna show me where to go, which he did. And we went into the church. We were the first ones in there. And Goering goes right to the front of the church, right in the front of the chapel, the church, and he sits down, and he sat down, and I'll never forget that, with his hands on a rail and half sitting and half kneeling. And I come in right next to him. And I was as straight as a board. I had just come out of parochial school. You know, the nuns were teaching school there. And as soon as I sat down next to him, Goering just stares at me, just kept staring at me. So I didn't know what was wrong. I thought this was a natural thing to do. So I'm straight as a board, and I was looking at Herman Goering, and like I said, you know, what was going through my mind, I said, if I ever sat like this in church, in a parochial school where nuns or teachers, a nun had come up behind you and wrap you right back in the neck, you know, wrap you in the head. And this is what I was thinking of. So anyway, I let it go, and he just kept staring at me. It was bothering me, and I looked down at him, and I kept staring at him. I said to myself, you know, like I mentioned, I'm the guard, he's the prisoner. But it didn't work with Goering. You know, I couldn't outstare this man. My God, not 18 anyway. So I was getting very uncomfortable. He didn't blink, he just kept staring and didn't take it with this bulldog face, whatever we call it. And I was getting uncomfortable, and I said, something's wrong here. You know, I sensed it after a little while. So I turned around and I looked in the back like this, and all the guards that escorted the prisoners in there were in the back, you know, up against the wall. None of them sat with their prisoner. I looked on the other side and I said, that's a mistake. But nobody told me in rules that I wasn't supposed, you know, if I escort a prisoner, I take him to church. Nobody told me, don't sit with him, sit in the back. So it turns out that, you know, we were the first ones in here. And I didn't know this. And they still held their ranks. Goering was the highest ranking person there. He was a rank marshal. So nobody got in front of Goering. They still kept their ranks. So I didn't know this. If somebody come in front of me and a guard left them and went up against a wall, I would have done the same thing. But I didn't know that, so I was just staying with Goering there. And after I realized I'm not supposed to be there, you know, I got up slowly and I kept my composure and I went to the back of the church, and I never made a mistake like that again. It was
Well, what did the other guards say?
Nothing, you know, we didn't talk while we were in there. We couldn't. So I just left there, and you know, none of them said anything. You know, I guess it was just embarrassing.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
Julius Streicher. He used to get up at 6 o'clock. He was the one that got up the earliest. He got up somewhere around 6 o'clock in the morning, and when he went to bed, he went to bed nude. You know, he didn't have any underclothing, so he went to bed nude, and he always chewed gum. And as a matter of fact, he asked me for some chewing gum. You know, I wanted his autograph at the time. And, you know, he couldn't speak English, and I couldn't speak German. Well, anyway, he went to bed nude. He'd take that huge chunk of gum. He'd put it on the little table he had, a little collapsible table, and he'd leave it there at night. Went to bed in the morning. He'd get up and he'd chew the gum. Well, that's not the point I was getting at. The point I was getting at, he's new. He'd get up early in the morning, and in the cell, there was a little alcove right by the door. You'd look in, and if they went to the bathroom there, you could see part of them. You could see them all. You'd lean way over to the side. You could see their legs, a little past their knees, but if they went way back, you wouldn't be able to see them. So There was an alcove, there was a toilet there, there was a cot where they slept, which was bolted to the door, and there was a little table that was collapsible under probably 30, 40 pounds. If you leaned on it, it was a metal table, and it would collapse because they didn't want anybody to stand on it or commit suicide by putting probably a blanket around these window. Well, anyway, he got up. He was the first one up in the morning, and he'd go to the little. They didn't have any sinks or anything like that where they could wash up. All you had is this toilet. So he'd go to the toilet and splash water in his face early in the morning. And of course he's nude, and 18 years old, you know, I've never seen anybody do that. But he used to do calisthenics. He'd jump up and down. And then he had to face the guard, you know, because you couldn't turn your back for any length of time. So I'm looking in this window, I'm looking at this guy jumping up and down, you know, and it was very embarrassing to me because I've never seen this at 18 years old, you know, but it didn't seem to bother him at all, you know. And that was a little occasion where I didn't exactly like. And
now, you were there to the end of the trial, Bill?
yes, I wasn't in at the beginning,
No,
to the end.
To the end, you're at the end?
Yes, I didn't see Herman Goering commit suicide or anything like that, no.
Was there, but you were there, and not that you were on duty that night, but what was the buzz among the guards after that happened? What was the conversation? And that happened pretty much on Andrus's watch.
Yes. Well, the first thing, I heard it on the radio, you know, Herman Goering committed suicide. The first thing that entered my mind, I said, you know, that could have been me. I said, I could have been guarding Goering at that time. So it was going to me. I said, geez, what the first thing that entered my mind, what are they going to do to the poor guard that was there guarding him? So this is what I was thinking of, because it could have been me, and I think I was more worried about that than anything else. He's very clever. Goering was a very clever man. And when I was growing up and I seen Goering in a newsreel, I always looked at Goering as sort of a clown. He always wore different uniforms. Of course, you know. And he always jolly, and he seemed not exactly a bad man. He's like a clown, a funny man in the Nazi Party. But when I got to know Goering, he was no clown and he was no dummy. He was a very intelligent man, and he could grasp a situation almost right away. You know, he could come right out. And as a matter of fact, you know, after I had a little incident in a church, you know, every time he'd see me, you know, he'd give me dirty looks. And I could remember him coming out of his cell. He had to go by me to go to the courtroom. He'd just come out and he'd just glance like that, and he spots me. And he just stared at me coming down. He had to go by me to go to the courtroom. And I was down the end of the corridor. I was watching him, and he just stared at me. And as he came close to me, he slowed down, and he gives me a dirty look. You know how you give a person a dirty look, you know? Like something like this. Goering starts with my shoes, and then he comes up slow like this. It's coming up slow, and I swear, the hair in the back of my head was coming up. You know, the man was very powerful, and he showed it. And he could be the most charming man in the world. You know, I see him in there when he was being interviewed, or even if Gilbert went in, you'd see him, and he'd smile and jovial, and I'm saying to myself, the man could be the most deadliest man, and he could be the most charming man in the world. So he could manipulate people. He's very clever.
Was there anybody even close among the other defendants as far as people who jumped out at you as personalities?
Just let me think a minute. Well, Schacht was a very clever man. He's the only one that had his this little table. It's a collapsible table. They use it as a desk, and he's the only one in the prison that had this table set facing the door as you come in. See, the tables were on usually up against the wall, but he had his table set as you come in the door. It was facing you like you're coming in an office,
Right.
like this. You come in the door here. So he had his desk set like this. So when I asked him for his autograph, I started collecting autographs. I'm not the only one. We may have broke a few rules, but I wasn't the only one. There were others doing this. So
Sure.
I just don't want to hurt the trial in any way to say that I upset anything. It was just something, a natural thing to do, because it was so boring in the prison itself. If you stand in one position for 2 hours, it's boring. Believe me, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. You look at your watch, and the time just seems to be standing still.
Yeah.
It's you go crazy, my goodness, the time is not moving at all. So, I decided I'm going to do something different, just keep my mind occupied, do something. So I decided to collect autographs. And when I asked for Shocked, I think it was Shocked we were talking about, that had his desk set like an office. So I asked Shocked, when I was collecting autographs, I was looking in a window, I said, Shocked, autograph, your autograph. So he just looks, he didn't even bother getting up, he just looks like that. And he says, ein Autograph, ein Zigaretten, 2 autographs, 2 Zigaretten. And I said, nine. I said, autograph, and he didn't want to give me his autograph unless he got a cigarette. He was clever, and the rest would give you their autographs without too much trouble. And the military men, Jodl and Keitel, they were strictly professional men. Yes, I don't know if you've ever seen a Prussian officer of the German General Staff. They professional men, and I think, I used to look at Keitel, and, he'd never do anything out of the way. They're trained when they're young. Like von Rundstedt, there's a lot of difference looking at an American soldier, an officer, that goes to West Point for 4 years, and he comes out, and he's an officer and a gentleman. If you look at von Rundstedt, he's the officer that made the biggest impression on me, is von Rundstedt. And looking up his autobiography or his past, 7 years old, they're in a military academy, and they're let's say born soldiers, or they're molded into soldiers. They just don't pop in 4 years and they're a soldier, but they're born soldiers instead of a family. And the von Rundstedts had an officer in the Prussian army since, I believe, the 14th century, somewhere around there, in the estate that they had in Prussia. And Keitel and Jodl represented this type of soldier. They were very, very strict. And you'd never see them, let's say, in a uncompromising position where, they'd put their feet up on you'd never see them like that, or in a way not becoming an officer. I often notice that. And they used to tire me, and I used to say, what's the matter with these guys? They don't seem to relax. Well, this is the way they were brought up.
Yeah. Did you ever get Hess's autograph?
Yes.
How did you do that? I heard he was difficult to get an autograph.
Very, very difficult. If it wasn't for these men, if it wasn't for Gilbert mentioning about Hess, you have to catch Hess at the right time.
Right.
And I think this sort of helped, because when I went to get his autograph, he just sort of screamed, and he talked nonsense. No, and I couldn't speak German, and he wasn't talking English. He's talking in German. I don't know what he's talking about. So a few times, I'd say, Hess, autograph, in his cell. So I'd let it go. So I'd wait a little while. Hey, Rudolf, yeah, autograph. So he'd do the same thing till I finally caught him. I caught him at a pretty good time. I said, Rudolf, autograph, autograph, autograph. He's looking at me. Officer wants your autograph. An officer. I didn't tell him it was for me, but I was telling officer, autograph. So he comes over and he signed Rudolf Hess. And he gave it back to me, but I think I caught him at a fairly good time. But probably some of the other guards didn't do that. You know, they just said, oh, the guy's a nut. You know, I can't get his autograph. But be patient and wait and catch him at the right time. Now you just happen to do that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that did this. I'm sure there are others that have his autograph.
Well, I tell you, I'm an autograph collector, and I've seen collections of Nuremberg defendants on being sold, and always missing is Hess.
You're kidding.
Yeah. So he's a rare autograph at Nuremberg. That doesn't mean, of course, Hess signed a lot of stuff as a German official.
Well,
but you got something unique.
Ray D'Addario's got the autographs too.
Yeah.
And when well, of course, when I got my autographs, you know, I didn't want them to sign their names on a little small piece of paper, so I got large pieces of paper, and they fit into my my ETO jacket, you know, when we used to go on duty. So I always had the papers there. So when I'd be on the, you know, when I'd be on a cell, I'd look around, make sure nobody's, you know, nobody's coming in. You could, well, if somebody was coming in, like say an officer, you could hear the clanking of the metal doors. So I'd be careful. So when I'm ready, you know, I just hand this out. Hey, whoever cell I was on, I get their autograph. But I didn't know that. Well, it's because he was difficult. He was a nut. He was, like I say, we called him a nut.
That's why I love the story.
Oh.
You did it.
Yeah, I did it. Well, I didn't know it at the time. You know, if I look back on what I did now, today at my age, and I look back, I wouldn't do this. You know, I'd say, what are you crazy? You're going to get all these autographs? You're a nut. You know, so I look back at 18, but I did it at 18. Yeah. Yeah. And Rudolf Hess, not Rudolf Hess, Ernest Kaltenbrunner, rather, big tall fellow, 6'7", somewhere around there, huge hands, and he was the biggest crybaby in there. I used to see Hess. I'm getting these men confused now. Kaltenbrunner, he'd sit at the little table, and all of a sudden he'd break out crying. You know, so what the heck is this cry? And as brutal as he was, you know, he's a brutal man. He's a bully. You know, that's all you'd look at him. My God, you're afraid of him. And even the escort guard, the white helmet guards that used to come down to relieve us, the white helmet guards you see in the courtroom used to come down, and we'd open up the cell doors to leave them out, and they'd be in charge, and they'd escort them to the courtroom. And when the court is in session, they'd be there. And when the court is over, they'd bring it back to the cells, and we'd take over. Excuse me. It's just this cold, you know. The white helmet guards, they'd escort them to the courtroom. The green helmet guards, well, you never seen us. Like I say, history was made in the courtroom. Nobody ever took pictures of the guards where we were. No cameras. I never seen any cameras in the cells. And it was an interesting. Well, when I started collecting autographs, it was very interesting at the time to meet these men, the biggest men in the world. And one story, I followed this right through. Hans Frank, I used to guard him. Well, when I was guarding him, he was reading this book, kept reading this book continuously. So I'm saying, what the heck is he reading? You know, it's so interesting. That's all I'm doing is staring at him for 2 hours. So I'm looking, reading the book. He'd put the book down on the cot. He'd get up and he'd start pacing his cell back and forth and talking to himself. Then I'm looking at him. Oh, what's so interesting about the book? He'd sit back down, he'd calm down, sit back down, grab the book, he'd start reading again. He did this continuously. So I'm saying, what the heck is he reading? So as it turns out, when I used to go off duty, I'd come back to the cell. You know, if I had somebody else, I'd come back to a cell, and I'd look at them. You know, I'd just peek in. Up, the door's open again. I'd look at. Oh, that's all right. You know, it just fascinated me. What's he reading? What was so interesting? And if I had somebody else, you know, I'd come in, I'd have somebody else, I'd stop over to Hans Frank's cell, and I'd look in, and he's reading the same book. And then I'd go over. So the curiosity got the best of me. So this particular time, I was off duty. And I inquired, and I said, what is Rudolf Hess, what is Hans Frank reading? I said, that's so interesting. You know what he was reading? The Bible. Mm. So I followed this right through. So when they put a rope around his neck, you know, he turned completely religious. When they put a rope around his neck to hang him, I was not there at the hangings. There's very few people at the hangings. I knew the hangman, John Woods, but I didn't see the hangings. And this is the statement that he made, Hans Frank. This is the statement he made before he hung. He said, I am thankful for the kind treatment I have received while in prison. And I ask God to accept me with mercy. And they dropped him. You know, how can you forgive a man like this? If you read up a little on Hans Frank, you know, somewhere around a quarter of the Polish population was annihilated. Auschwitz, which is the greatest extermination camp the Germans had, was located in Poland, and this was his territory. Read a little bit about Hans Frank and see if you can forgive the man. So the little incidents they just stick in my mind.
What about the hangman? You said you know him. Did he talk at all about the actual hanging itself of the 11?
Well, when he first came in there, I guess everybody wanted to meet the hangman because he was like a star. He's going to bring this to an end, and everybody wanted to see him. So he was stationed with our group because he had access. He had to have access to the prison. The hangings were done inside the prison, in this little recreation building, and it wasn't that big, and there was three scaffolds built. Mm-hmm. Only 2 of them were used, and he showed us how he's going to hang him. You know, he had this. It's a thick rope. It's not just a little lasso that's going to break. I don't know if you've ever seen a professional hangman's rope. It's thick, and he mentioned he's going to put 13 loops around the rope. You know, it comes out this big, and when you hang him, you take these loops. You know, you put it on just behind the left ear. I believe it's the left ear he mentioned, and he says when they hang, you want the neck to go sideways, so it'll snap or crack. You know, you've got plenty of leverage like this. If you drop the person like that, you could strangle. This is the point I guess he was getting at. Put the rope behind the left ear so, you know, it doesn't move back, and the head is going to snap. And when a trap door opens, if you do a good job, the trap door opens, he says, and the body dropped, he says, if you do the job right, you can hear the neck crack. When it, he's quite a guy. He's a heavy drinker, though. He drank quite a bit. And of course, at the end of the trials, there was a statement stating that he did a bad job or he fumbled the job. You must went through the. I don't know. I can't tell you. I've seen pictures of the hangings, but he did mention. He said, when you hang a person, you know, when a body drops and it stops, he says a person can hemorrhage from the mouth, through the eyes, through the ears, the nose. So I never thought of him doing a bad job. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then after the hangings, there's a few people that said that he botched the hangings and it took too long, like a Ribbentrop, I think it took 10 minutes, or Keitel, it took 10 minutes before he was actually dead. So this I don't know. I couldn't tell you about that. But he's quite a character.
Yeah. Oh, did he live in the Boston area?
I don't know that much
You
about
didn't,
him.
yeah, okay.
No, I wasn't. I seen him a few times, but I wasn't that friendly with him, you know. Yeah, and most of the fellows call him Woody.
Did the cell guards have any sense as to how the trial was going, how Jackson was doing? Did you guys talk about that, or were you just worried about the day-to-day?
No, we didn't worry about the trials. Day to day, you know, we were taking care of the prisoners, and that was enough. If we got a day off, we weren't going to go to the trial to find out how Jackson's making out or the rest of these people are. We had our own little problems. And when we got out of the cells, you know, I'd hang around Nuremberg, you know, I went to the Opera House every now and then. They had the Red Cross. And I went into the Grand Hotel. It was destroyed, but they were repairing it at the time. That was the finest hotel, I believe, in Nuremberg. And the same thing as the Opera House. I went there a few times. And every time you'd go in to see, well, they had this band. It was I went down there to see. They were a Jewish band in the concentration camp that were playing. They're performing there, and there was no heat. Of course, all of Nuremberg there was nothing there, and I often wondered how the city was so destroyed, especially the walled city. I used to spend a lot of time in there, where the Adolf Hitler Square was. I used to spend time in there, and I say, where do these people live? I see them come out of the underground like moles, you know. They'd pop up. And of course, I also went to the stadiums that they had known. Absolutely fantastic, these stadiums. And there was a series of stadiums, not just one, Soldiers Field, where Hitler made his speeches. There were other stadiums there, and Nuremberg was quite a city. And I got lost in the city one night. You know, I don't know how the people lived there. The walled city itself, there was no lights, there was no water, and all they had on a little steeple probably is a spotlight. If you go at night, they had a spotlight shining. So if you could see the light, you could see a part of the road, you know, that was, the rubble was pushed aside, and you could walk down there. But if there was no moon, and let's say you took a corner and the light wasn't there and you were in the dark, you couldn't see it all. You'd be stumbling in the rubble, of course. And when I was there were still 20,000 bodies buried. Around 20,000 bodies or so still buried in that rubble. Every now and then you could still, you know, smell the stench. You know, if it was quiet and it wasn't windy, you could, because I was standing there in the spot, and a few of us were standing there, and you know, I said, "What the heck is that smell?" And one of the fellows I was with, he says, "It's probably the bodies that are buried underneath the rubble."
Yeah.
So it was pretty well devastated. I've never seen anything like that. You know, a city that was totally, you know, one morning you could say, I'm going down to the store to get a cigar, or I'm going for a beer in the corner store, or I'm going to a bar room, and all of a sudden one night everything is wiped out. You know, just about, you get up, I can't go to the store, I can't go to the grocery store, it's gone. I can't get a cigar. There's nothing there, nothing left. Amazing.
Well, you're amazing, Bill.
Oh,
Your recall's amazing.
Well, there's certain things you never forget. You know, especially at 18, your mind is pretty, well, I remember, I think, more when I was younger than I do now. There's nothing, well, I don't think there's anything that interesting that I've seen, you know, when I was 18. To be involved in this was a big thing. I realize it now, yeah.
And I appreciate you taking the extra effort to come all the way out here for this conference.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, like I say, it was hard to refuse. Your people were so nice. And then, you know, you even offered to put us up in that. I said, gee, that's so generous of you people. And I said, you know, it's just hard to refuse. So, and I'm glad that I was of service to you here.
Well, it's great, and to have you and Ray and Alan. You met Alan Dreyfus from, I don't know if you met Alan. Alan's here. You'll have to meet him before he goes.
Dreyfus.
He was a Stars and Stripes.
Oh, yes, I did. We took a picture together, yes. And did you ever, the book that came out about Richard Sonnenfeld?
Yes, Dick, yeah.
Did you read his book?
Yes, I have.
Absolutely fantastic. You know, I read his book. This man here is one in a million. You know,
Right.
it's just, I couldn't believe everything I read. What this guy's seen, what he went through is absolutely amazing. You know, you want to get him
Well, he's been here. Dick's been here.
Oh,
Dick
he
spoke
was?
at Chautauqua, and he was one of our original speakers at a conference we did a couple years ago. So it was terrific to hear.
He
Dick
must
here.
have. Oh, he must have been a wonderful speaker. You know, according to the book.
He's riveting.
And he's got to be. He's really. I would love to meet that man.
In fact,
you know?
he gave us, he gave the Jackson Center his transcripts as he was doing the translations, and so he had all the original translations which he marked up and he gave them to us. So it's a terrific part of our archives. In fact, there's a little display right outside in the Athenaeum. I'll show you, which has his markups.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, geez, there's so many people there that, you know, I was telling Harris, I said, you know, as I look back on the Nuremberg trials, I said, you people, you know, are doing the best to make this a better world to live in. You know, you're in a position to do that. And then he was telling me, he says, no, he said, we were too busy trying to convict these men. You know, think of that, you know, and I thought, you know, it's just the way you're looking at things. But I'm glad you got a hold of this, Richard, you know. Oh, that must have been quite an honor just to interview that. And did you interview him yourself? Oh, wonderful. That's probably the best you'll ever see.
He was very good, as was you. This was terrific. Your recall is tremendous, and you filled in a lot of blanks.
Oh, well, I'm glad I did that, you know, so fill you in on something like that, yeah. And I hope I didn't say anything to interrupt the trial, you know, like I say. And let me put it this way about the trials. This was a fair and just trial, the Nuremberg trials, the IBM trial. It was a fair and just trial, and these men deserve what they got. And you had great people there at that trial. You had them right here. You're very fortunate to have them.
Well, thank you so much, Bill.
My pleasure. Is that about it? Or?
That's it.